businesses that have closed, yoga studios, travel agencies, of course, things like that. Financial security certainly has been impacted. Canceled plans, events. We're not getting together with family, many of us, for the holidays, weddings, births, graduations, things like that. I see the poll is up there, and
yeah, and I'm gonna butt in because you just mentioned weddings. One loss is our rituals, and looks like a whopping 88% put that they've experienced in their own lives a loss of some important ritual, human activity.
Yeah, and as you can see in that poll, that was a very broad definition of rituals, but going to the gym, just human interactions, hugging, shaking hands, interacting with folks, or not being able to interact with folks, maybe not friends or acquaintances, and that's an obvious, but just people you'd maybe see day to day going into a store or going to a yoga class or things like that. So yeah, that's not surprising that a large percentage of folks mark that. Time with family and friends, all of them were all pretty high. Fortunately, job and or financial security is the lowest. So that's good to see there. Let me list the rest of the items here. Time with loved ones, loss of opportunities. Certainly, I know for me that I was right in February. I was starting to make some momentum with getting some increased programming on well-being for law firms, and that's pretty much been shut down since February. So that's where I was impacted. Sense of control, which I know we lawyers like to feel like we have a lot of control over things, and this is certainly, there are many things in life that that prove that that's not the case. COVID has certainly been one of those. Or normalcy, obviously, human gestures we talked about. Anticipatory grief, meaning we don't know what's coming. Thank goodness the vaccine's starting to come out, but we don't know how long it's going to take for things to get back to quote unquote normal. So there are still maybe some losses ahead for us, certainly. And one we haven't named here is loss through death. And I'm hoping that folks in the audience have not been impacted in that way, but certainly many of us have. Go ahead,
Michael,
Jay.
I just wanted to comment that it's not just being aware of the loss, but there are different types of loss, as you just pointed out, and really giving ourselves permission. I mean, that's a warm and fuzzy word, but giving ourselves permission to accept that it's a loss to us, because lawyers aren't always good at accepting loss or admitting we're not in control. Here in Chapel Hill, we love sports, the Atlantic ACC, and so that's been a loss. It's been disrupted. It isn't the same, and so all sorts of different losses.
Yeah, and when we, going back to the idea of control, as lawyers, you can think about the things we already don't have control over. We don't have control over the opposing counsel, the other side, the facts, the law. We don't even really have control over our clients to a certain degree. We don't have, if we're litigators, have control over the judges or the lawyers. So having, or the jury, so having control is sort of a mirage anyway. But COVID has brought home the fact that there are things we don't have control over that maybe we thought we did. And maybe we did have more control over it before COVID. So many of the losses we're experiencing during COVID are what I'd call ambiguous loss. Some are clear, like if your business closes, that's a clear loss. But many of these things, like lack of control or lack of certainty or lack of normalcy, those are kind of wishy-washy, ambiguous. They're unless we really take a step back and identify these things, we may not even identify them as losses, because it's almost like the that old story of the frog in the water. If it throw a frog in boiling water, of course it jumps out. If you put a frog in standing water and then you just turn up the heat gradually, the frog doesn't notice. Hopefully that's not an experiment that was actually ever done, but that is, I think that's a good metaphor for how COVID is impacting many of us.
Michael, on the subject of loss, one of our audience members sent in a question. commenting on family members, school-age children, and
Yes.
their losses, and how
Yes.
and sometimes we may not appreciate their loss or appreciate how their losses impact us as well.
Great question. Great question. I love that. Yeah. I just had a session yesterday, a counseling session. I do a lawyer assistance program work up here in Vancouver, where I live now, Vancouver, Canada. And I was meeting with a mom and her 16-year-old daughter and helping them navigate some conflict they were having. And the daughter was identifying all the different losses that she had, not being able to go to a class that she outside school class that she used to go to, not seeing friends as much in person. It's really hitting teenagers. Teenagers, their oxygen is relationships. I mean, it is for us adults too, but even more so for teenagers. So that's a great question and a great realization. And parents, definitely, it's important that they acknowledge that this is hitting us as adults and hitting our kids as much or maybe even more. So as Jay very wisely said, one of the best things we can do to respond to loss is to acknowledge it. Just acknowledge it's happening, not to deny it. And then that may seem like a no-brainer, but for some of us, as I said, it's ambiguous, so we don't even maybe acknowledge it's a loss. But for others, we want to kind of push against it. So just acknowledge that this is a hard time, and I am experiencing some loss. And then just to acknowledge and feel the feelings and other reactions that you're having. Again, sounds like a simple concept. We lawyers stereotypically tend to overvalue our heads, our analytical abilities over our hearts and our emotions. So in this case, it's important to acknowledge that our emotions can give us good information as well. And to acknowledge these things takes the power away from them, doesn't erase them, but helps you process and work through them more. And you can see some on the right side, lack of motivation. That's one that I know is coming up for a lot of folks. Or even just the yearn to, I know for me, every once in a while, I kind of just fantasize of pre-COVID, like when things were back the way they used to be. And I go to that place for just a moment. I wish if it was back to normal, and of course that's not happening. This is yeah, Jay, go ahead.
Yeah, let me before
Please.
you leave the subject of
Yeah.
loss. I think some lawyers, I don't remember being taught in law school about dealing with loss and
No.
coping with grief, and many lawyers deal with others' losses and grief, daily. So they're sort of battered, by by a lot of heavy stuff. And so I think the first thing that I heard from you that is so helpful is just realizing it's okay to feel kind of down or lost or uncertain, or those feelings may be normal because it's a crazy time, and there's a lot going on. And giving ourselves permission to put those feelings on the table and then working through them.
You brought up a good point too, Jay. The idea that lawyers, like me as a therapist now, people don't come to see us, lawyers or therapists, because everything is going wonderfully in their lives. Now, for some, there are exceptions, of course, where if you're a transactional lawyer, to have a contract done or something like that. But often people come to us because they're having problems, and they're not in their best light also in terms of how they're behaving. And we can hear some difficult stories and also deal with some difficult situations, people who are angry, people who are really sad, people who are in pain. And that it can't help but impact us as lawyers to hear these stories and we can, I don't know if you've heard this term, Jay, but vicarious trauma. we can experience through their stories some of the trauma that our clients have had, and to recognize that too. It's a little bit of an aside from what we're talking about here in terms of COVID and grief and loss, but I wanted to highlight that, Jay, because you brought that up. So here's a cover that just came out in the New Yorker, and I thought, and I knew this program was coming up, and I thought this is wonderful. I got to share this with the folks at the Alta Pro workshop. Just take a look at that, and I mean, you see, the woman is of course on her laptop. She's got it on book, so she's at eye level. We don't know if she's on Zoom or which program she's using. She's all dressed up on top, and on the bottom she's got gym shorts. Look at her floor. She's got her cat to the right. She's got a room divider. It looks like there's a bed on the other side. The point is, many of us are kind of working from home, and we're presenting. At least the top half of us is presentable. The bottom half, who knows? I actually do put shoes on for this when I present, even though I'm sitting at my desk at home, just because it helps me feel like I'm in presenter mode. But I thought this was just a humorous introduction into the whole idea of working from home. And I want to share a poll question with you. Let's see if I can. Oh, there it is. Okay, good. Ben is on the job. So here's another poll question for you. And we'll give you a moment or two to answer this. How have you been coping in the last month? And you can choose any more than one of these. You don't have to choose just one. And then this will be an introduction into a topic that's very much related to COVID, but just it's slightly different.
Michael,
the idea of surge capacity. Yeah,
gotcha,
Jay.
Gotcha. If I can jump in here before we get the poll results and before you start in with the capacity.
Sure.
Folding back to the New Yorker cover.
Yeah.
What struck me first, I wanted to know, was there something you wanted to share with us, something you wanted to tell us about how you were presenting here on Zoom? But we know you're wearing shoes. You said you're wearing shoes.
But, I didn't mention the bottom half of me. That's true.
Right.
I'm wearing pants, just so everyone knows.
Too much information. The second thing I wanted to point out, as a former risk manager, is how cluttered the space is. In our home space, we wouldn't keep our office space like that. And that's when accidents happen. That's when mistakes happen. That's when malpractice claims happen. To bring it to sort of a practical level here. Anyway, I see we've got some poll results in. If you want to comment on that.
And I want to follow up on what you said too after we look at these poll results. So it looks like I'm often exhausted. It looks like the most folks are frequently unmotivated, trouble focusing and concentrating. So a good more than a third of our viewers, and more than half, I'm experiencing some of these things at times, but generally coping pretty well, which is great. So it looks like and those who said I'm coping well, it's the smallest number there, about 18%. So there's definitely a solid number of folks who are experiencing some or more than one of these traits. But the good news is a large majority say they're coping pretty well, even though they're experiencing some of these things. I like what you said about, Jay, that you need to be really intentional about your environment. And when we're home, it can be harder, especially if you have kids at home. And we're going to be talking in a little bit about lawyer well-being and the different elements of lawyer well-being. And one of those things is environment, the environment that we're working in. That can make a huge difference in how we're feeling. And this could be at home for many of us now, but some of us are still going to the office. So it's really important to pay attention to the environment that we're working in. You can see behind me, I've got a plant and a bookshelf and a mirror up there. I try to set up my area where I work to be comfortable, even though Todd teased me and said I should have a black light there behind me. But I try to make an environment that's comfortable, but not everywhere in my apartment looks like this. There are times in my one-bedroom apartment that I've been working out of the bedroom because my partner needs this space. But I try to make that space comfortable as well. And we can talk more about that when we get to the slide on well-being. So, so the whole idea of surge capacity is that we are built as humans to deal with stressful situations, but it's generally short-term. So, for example, if there's a tornado or a hurricane or earthquake or some other natural disaster, we can deal with that on a short-term basis, and there's a beginning and an end to it. Of course, the cleanup can take a while, but what's going on here is that this is something that's been going on for, 8 or 9 months now without an end. We still don't know when the end is, again, even though the vaccine's out, and that's great news. And we're depleted. We don't have the capacity to deal with something like this, and it impacts us. And this is from an article that I encourage folks to look up called Your Surge Capacity is Depleted. It's Why You Feel Awful. So how do we deal with a depleted surge capacity? Here's just some ideas, and we can, Jay, we can talk about some of these if you want. So one, it's going back to what we talked about with grief and loss, accept that life is different right now. Again, sounds simple, but for some of us, we resist that, and we want things to be normal even though they're not. Expect your productivity to be impacted. That can be hard for those of us who are high achievers, who are problem solvers, who work, who are good at setting up routine. During COVID, and maybe by now you all have a routine, but even now, routine can be impacted. I know where I live in Vancouver, the restrictions now have been ramped up. Maybe schools have been impacted. Maybe your kids were going to school and now they're not. So things, even when you think you have a routine, things change. So and the article says, we're all beginners at this. No one has experienced a pandemic before, unless you're quite old and experienced the flu pandemic back in the early 1900s. So to be patient with ourselves and know that our productivity is not going to be the same at times.
Michael, to jump in here, a comment I think is very appropriate from one of our audience members who is a litigator.
Mm-hmm.
He says these days it's very difficult to move litigation along. Delays are accepted more and more by the court, et cetera. Hard to create leverage to settle. Much more stress. So all sorts of loss. There's sort of direct losses, indirect losses, and talk about certainty. We're unsure when things will be back to normal, if ever. So, and lawyers love certainty. Lawyers love to know, what's going to happen tomorrow or.
Yeah, that's a great comment. Thank you, Jay, and thank you for participants. I appreciate your comment. Plus, I'm thinking for this litigator, I know for me, I love presenting in a room to people. I love to feel to feed off their energy. They feed off my energy. That's my passion. I am thrilled that I have Zoom to continue to do programs, and I love that I can still do it, and I still enjoy it. It's not the same. So I just wonder for litigators, I would imagine they love being in the courtroom. They love doing what they do, talking to the jury, trying to convince a jury of their case, performing. I know for me, it's it's about teaching, but I have to admit, there's a performance piece to it. I like being in front of people. So there's that loss there for litigators. They're not now. I know that hearings and maybe even trials are now being done online, but it's not the same. So there's maybe a loss there for litigators as well. We talked about grief, so we don't have to go there. Experiment with both and thinking. And I'm guessing that some of the participants know what that is, but maybe a majority don't. We can tend to, as humans, and I think particularly as lawyers, get into either or thinking or black and white thinking. And really most of what we deal with day to day is more gray. So for example, an example of both and thinking would be, let's go to the competence issue about we're not necessarily as competent or as productive as, well, let's not say competent, we're not as productive as we have been in the past. So both and thinking would be, I'm highly competent, and right now I'm kind of going with the tide day to day. I'm highly competent, and there are days where I'm not as productive or competent as I want to be. Does that make sense? So it can be both. You can have a rough day productivity wise and still be a competent person and productive most of the time. So that's what I mean by both and thinking, to not get into that trap that if you have a bad day, that maybe you're not as productive as you used to be, that maybe you weren't able to focus or concentrate as much. Maybe you had to just take a mental health afternoon or even a mental health day. That doesn't mean that you aren't productive or you're not competent.
So if I have a bad day at the office, if I have a bad experience with a client, which those occasionally happen,
sure,
it doesn't necessarily mean I'm a terrible lawyer or I need to get out of this profession, or I need a break. Maybe need to go to the gym. Go to the gym, get some of that social interaction. But
yeah, go to the gym if you can. The gym's open, or get some exercise, or go outside. Just take a walk. I did that before the program this morning. I just went outside, and I didn't have time to run this morning. Just went outside and walked around with my cup of tea for about 10 minutes, just to get a breath of fresh air and to come in with for me the right mindset. Exactly. All right. So there are a few more. Look for activities that continue to fill you up. Some of these activities have been taken away through COVID. I like to work in coffee shops. That's not happening as much now, at all. Actually, I'm not going to coffee shops at all. So what are things that you can continue to do? There are some things you can continue to do, but are there new things that you can do that fill you up? And are there things that that you can look forward to? I think that's been one of the harder things for folks, is a lot of things that they used to do, like travel, that they can look forward to, are not there anymore. So it can be like maybe smaller things. I play the guitar. I used to go to a guitar group in person. That's not happening. It has been happening for months. So we do it online now. It's not the same, but every Friday I look forward to that. So having things that that fill you up and that you can schedule, I think can be very helpful.
And I'll jump in here. I had another comment saying, "Hey Jay, the gym isn't open," because I said go to the gym if you need to. And you pointed that out too. But but you made a good point. Look for new stuff. Maybe this is a good opportunity to see what. And then we had another comment. Now I'm getting lots of walks around the neighborhood, and I've heard that countless times. I've gotten outside much more. So.
Yeah, and I love that, because that reminds me. I worked with a client who said that he and his wife are walking together outside more than they ever have before COVID, and they want to continue that even when things get back to whatever the normal is. So that's important to think about too. Are there things that you have implemented during COVID that are different that you want to continue after, even after COVID is out the door. There might be some things that you like that now are filling you up that you want to continue to implement post-COVID world. And you see the second bullet: focus on and maintain and strengthen important relationships. That's critical. We're not necessarily able to see folks as much, but maybe through Zoom, through phone. We did meet, my partner and I met with a couple on Sunday. We sat outside a coffee shop, even though it was pouring rain here in Vancouver, which is not terribly abnormal in the winter. Kept our social distance, but we were able to connect and chat with each other. It was covered, so we weren't getting soaked in the rain, in case anybody was worried about our health. And slowly build your resilience bank account. That may sound a little bit cheesy to some of you participants, a resilience bank account, but I like the metaphor. You know, many of us are getting, if you think of a bank account, we've had a lot of withdrawals for the last few months, energy-wise, psychically, literally. What can we do to make deposits? And here are some basic things, but they are the building blocks to building your resilience and your surge capacity. Sleep. Go to sleep at a regular time. Wake up at a regular time. Eat well. That's one of the things that I've heard, and certainly for me, I've had to be intentional about not going to comfort food too much. Like I could eat pizza probably every other day, and ice cream. And when we're feeling depleted, when we're grieving, when we're exhausted or unmotivated, we can go to some of those comfort foods. We just need to be intentional about that and not overdo it. Exercise, whatever that looks like, can be walking, jogging, yoga. It can be yoga online. There's that's happening now. Meditation. We'll talk about mindfulness in a moment, but I'm sure most of you have heard what mindfulness is. I'll define that in a second. And meditation doesn't have to mean lotus position. And we'll talk again. I'll define that in a moment. Self-compassion. I talked about that before. Be easy on yourself. Know that these are tough times, and that none of us have an instruction manual for this. And now we've learned, maybe over the last few months, how to cope, but it's been a long time, and things change, as I said. So know that you're going to have your moments of not being able to cope. Jed,
Michael,
do you have
yeah, when you introduced the topic of resilience, you said it may sound cheesy. I don't think it sounds cheesy at all. On the Alta Pro blog on our website, we posted a blog post on a survey that resilience is such a huge quality to have in times like this, and that law firms are now testing and interviewing applicants to test for their resilience and sort of their surge capacity.
Wow.
Things. So resilience doesn't sound cheesy at all. It sounds like something that that is a great quality to have and to keep the bank account full. You know.
Right. Yeah.
In times like this.
Yeah, and resilience is really just the ability to deal with adversity, to bounce back from adversity. And one of the things that came up earlier, I think in one of the, either something you said, Jay, or one of the comments that I'd forgot to mention is, and one of the ways to build your resilience is to pay attention to how you are talking to yourself and your self-talk, because that can impact your feelings and impact your behavior. So, for example, if you're having a rough day, maybe you're not as productive as you would have liked to have been, or that you pride yourself in being. If you say to yourself at the end of the day, I am incompetent, or I stink as a lawyer, that's going to make you feel pretty depressed. or maybe hopeless. Certainly some unhelpful feeling. But if instead you say, I've had a rough day, I haven't been as motivated as I usually am, I'm disappointed about not getting this brief done, and that's okay. I'll take care of myself tonight. I'll get a good night's sleep, and tomorrow I'll be back at it. So look at how you talk to yourself, because that can have, I know it sounds simple, in the concept sounds simple, but many of us don't pay attention to our self-talk. And most of our self-talk is kind of generic and neutral, like, oh my gosh, I got to call my mom. But some of it can be very toxic, and it can impact our emotions and our behavior. Gratitude, we'll come back to that at the end of the program, but with all the losses, with all the negative impacts of COVID, there's still things to be grateful for. I know for me, if I miss not being able to go to the gym, and I sometimes can't run when I want, but I'll go walking, and I'll be thankful that I can walk, that I can still do this, that my body is, my feet and my knees are still good enough for me to run. So be grateful for the things that you have. Many of us lawyers have been trained to look for what's wrong, to look for problems. We're problem fixers. That's makes sense. We're hired to do that, to fix problems or to anticipate problems. That can become a problem if that's all we do. We need to break that habit outside of our practicing and look for what's right and what's going well. And then connection, that goes back to focusing on relationships. And back to the relationships for a second. It's really important then when you are interacting with someone, whether it be in person or it's a little bit harder online, that you take away any distractions and that you are focusing on the person, making eye contact, and only listening and not trying to multitask. And it can be more challenging when you're online because the computer is staring right at you. You're maybe getting an email ding when you're talking to somebody on Zoom. So in terms of relationships, that's so important, is that you listen at the other, and that the other person feels like that they are being heard and listened to. And then saying no, setting limits. You don't have to take every assignment on. Now, of course, I do work with young associates who are just starting out, and it's hard for them to say no to anything because they want to prove that they can do the job, and they don't want to show any vulnerability, any weakness. So I know that can be hard, but saying no, whether it be to something at work or something outside work, is really important to build your resilience. So I'm going to move on to the last section of our program. We've touched on well-being already a little bit, but I want to dive a little bit deeper into the idea of well-being. And the task force on lawyer well-being, which was put together by the ABA, put out a report on lawyer well-being, and it actually it speaks to all the different groups who can impact lawyer well-being beside just the individual lawyer. Law firms, bar associations, lawyer assistance programs, judges, and it has recommendations on what they can do to improve lawyer well-being. And as individuals, we need to focus on what we can do for ourselves. But if we're working in an unhealthy environment, an unhealthy culture, we're kind of, to an extent, spinning against the wind. So if for those of you out there who are responsible for, or partly responsible for the culture of where you work, of your organization, your company, or your law firm, it's important to take inventory and really honestly assess whether the place where folks are working, this place where I help create the culture, is a healthy place to be. So as part of this report, they talked about, well, they defined lawyer well-being, of course, which was a pretty important piece to the report. Oh, what the heck is well-being? And they broke it down into 6 sections. And you can find this report and this graph at lawyerwellbeing.net online. You can see it's broken up into 6 different areas: emotional, intellectual, occupational, physical, spiritual, and social. And just take a second to, I'll just give you a second to read those 6 things, and you can kind of take an inventory and see how you're doing with these. I've already mentioned emotional and how important it is to value and manage our emotions. There are a couple things that aren't up here, by the way, that I would add. One is cultural well-being, and the other is environmental, which I mentioned earlier. How important is the environment that we live in, that we work in, for our overall well-being. And you see in the definition, they say it's a continuous process. It's a continuous process, not something you just assess once and you're done. I'll go back to the litigator. This is not all about every day I'm going to have the each one of these things in covered. Each one of these things I'm gonna take care of every day, because that's not realistic. If you're in a trial as a litigator, you're not going to be able to take care of all these different things. So you eat, sleep, and breathe trial. So much of it's going to be, much of your well-being is going to be focused on occupational and intellectual. But then when that trial is done, then you want to get back to looking at some of these other things and focus. You'll be able to focus less on occupational and more on some of these other things. So it's really, it's a flow. It's not an ideal balance every day. So I talked about mindfulness. I mentioned meditation, and I just want to go to just define what mindfulness is. And it's not very complicated. In practice, it can be challenging. So it's the ability to be in the present moment and be aware of what is happening right now. Like for me, right now, I am noticing that I am presenting a program, and I'm actually feeling pretty comfortable and enjoying working with Jay. And I'm feeling the chair, the seat of the chair against my backside, and I'm noticing the sunlight coming in, or sort of sunlight. So it's just noticing things in the moment and being curious about how you feel and what you're thinking, and not judging it, not saying, wow, I'm feeling really anxious right now. I shouldn't be anxious. It's bad to be anxious. Well, the fact is you're feeling anxious. So having some judgment about it isn't helpful. Just noticing it, noticing I'm anxious. Oh, that's really interesting that I'm anxious right now, and being curious about it and not fighting it. The more you can accept and be present with it, the more the anxiety will reduce. I've done this exercise with clients all the time, where I have them go towards the anxiety and not away from it. And invariably, for most folks, the anxiety lessens. And know that whatever situation you're in, that however you're thinking, whatever you're thinking, however you're feeling, it's transient. And it's going to go away. And that's important to know. This is not going to last forever.
Michael, thank you for these tips on mindfulness and well-being, and to let you catch your breath.
Sure.
We have one final question for our audience on their own well-being, a self-assessment, if you will, of their own sort of well-being practice. And here's the question.
Following best describes my well-being practice. Yes, so you choose one of those. This is not a multiple multiple selection question. Just choose one, just to want to kind of take your temperature on your own well-being practice.
I think I know which is the right answer. I've got the right answer. Professor, I've got the right answer. I don't know if it's the honest answer, but if it's the
There you
completely
go.
honest answer, but it's the
There you
right
go.
answer.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll
Anyway,
see,
well,
Jay.
let's keep
Okay.
while we're
Okay.
waiting for the.
So great. I'll just move along. So the importance of mindfulness is, or one of the important results of mindfulness is it gives you the opportunity to make a different choice. If we're not mindful, here are the results. Let's see. No time, next question. Okay, I like your honesty. Take vacation once a year, regularly focus on self-care before and or after, and I integrate self-care activities throughout the workday. Those are the highest percentages. And I like the honesty of I try, but nothing seems to help. Okay.
Which
Good.
we can all relate to at times,
Absolutely.
of course. But it looks like we've got a
Absolutely.
good group here, a pretty good, healthy group, or at least a well-being oriented group. So
yeah.
keep it going.
And an honest group too. And so back to what I was saying about mindfulness, when you are mindful, when you are assessing your thoughts and your emotions in the moment, you then have the opportunity to make a different choice of how you react to it. If you're not mindful, and I'll use for me as an example, if I tend to, my patience tend to be lessened when I'm driving. Let me put it that way. I have less love for my fellow human beings, and I can be more impatient and more judgmental. So if somebody does something like, of course, I'm always the wonderful driver and all the other drivers are idiots, right? But let's say another driver does something that makes me angry. If I'm not mindful, I might fall into my automatic way of being, which is losing my temper and yelling. And I mean, nobody can hear me but me. But if I'm mindful and notice, okay, I'm angry, what that person did really makes me angry, I'm going to take a deep breath and not go into my automatic way of being, which is my losing my temper. And it helps. Now, am I 100%? No. There are days where maybe I'm more exhausted and less able to be mindful, and I fall into that trap. So I am not perfect by any means, but it gives you the ability to break that habitual way of reacting to adversity. And then, of course, and we'll hammer this home throughout this program, talking to someone is often helpful. There's no reason for you to be isolated. You've got friends and family, and you've got colleagues to reach out to. You've got your bar association. You've got lawyer assistants. You've got malpractice insurance folks who you can reach out to consult with about, let's say you're having there's an ethical dilemma. So there are many resources out there. And it's really, really important that you don't isolate yourself. And here are the listings of what I just mentioned. There's some others: religious advisor, your spouse, partner, a mentor. And mentors are not just for young lawyers, by the way. I remember presenting this program in Ottawa, and one of the older lawyers, he's probably a lawyer in his 60s, said, "I tell these young associates, hey, I still have a mentor. Just because I'm an experienced lawyer doesn't mean have everything figured out." And I think that's great that he's able to give that message to young lawyers. Stop frequently during your day, and this goes back to mindfulness, because I don't know about you, but my days just go by so quickly. My gosh, the months and years go by quickly. So if you're not intentional about stopping and taking inventory and deciding, okay, am I doing what I want to be doing today? Or how am I feeling right now? Am I anxious? Am I depressed? Am I frustrated? And then being able to focus on that, take a breath, and decide, okay, why am I feeling this way, and what can I do about it? And then proceed intentionally. And it can also help when you're moving from one thing to another. Let's say you had a meeting with other folks from the firm, and something frustrating happened to you, or frustrated you, or annoyed you, and now you have a meeting with a client. Well, it's helpful for you to stop, take a breath, and decide, how do I want to be with this client? How can I push this frustration aside that I had from this meeting? And what is my intention with this client? How do I want to be? What are my goals with this client? So you can bring a different mindset to this next thing that you have to do. And I like to encourage folks to do something called micro self-care. And in that poll I gave you, I asked, some folks said, yeah, my self-care basically is taking vacation once a year, which is great. I'm glad you're doing that. Although during COVID, that's even been hard. And for some folks, self-care is before and after work, which again, great that you're doing that. Excuse me. But I want to encourage the lawyers out there to do self-care throughout your day, not just before and after. Some of the clients that I speak to, they're good about self-care before and after, but they don't realize that self-care can happen during the day as well. So that's what I'm talking about here. And micro meaning small. It doesn't have to be anything that takes a lot of time or that takes money. Just things to replenish yourself, because our work days take energy away, and some things more than others. And it depends on the person what things take. For me, when I was a lawyer, writing briefs was one of my least favorite things to do. And it just took so much energy. I was able to do it, and it was a decent product by the end, but it's really hard. Excuse me, really hard. For others, like I had a colleague who I worked with, he basically wrote one draft of his brief and he was done. For me, it was about 10 to 12 drafts. It was just blood, sweat, and tears. So think about, what are the things during my day that take the most out of me, and those, and then decide, what can I do after I'm done, at least for the day, on this particular item. What's something I can do to replenish myself? And it can be something simple. Once had a lawyer tell me that he would bring his favorite tea and favorite mug to work. And for him, that really was something soothing that helped him get through his day. Do something to move your body. Just get up from your seat, walk around, stretch. Do that exercise where you've got both arms in the air and you're stretching to the sky, one arm at a time. Focus on your breath. Just take a few deep breaths. Focus on how it feels to the breath to come in through your nose, and how it feels to come out of your mouth. And just do that 3 or 4 or 5 times. Embrace nature. That can be just staring out the window. Right now I'm looking out my window, and I'm seeing birds flying, I'm seeing leaves moving, I'm seeing people walking out on the sidewalk. Just doing that can give you a break from the, that mind work that we all do. Or walk outside for a few minutes, as I said. Listen to music.
Michael?
As I said, these are simple, free, and doable. Yeah, Jay?
No, I just wanted to say we've got about 2 minutes left. I want to get
okay.
to your gratitude exercise.
Yes. All right, I'm going to skip that. Skip what that previous slide. And this is an exercise that I recommend for all of you to try. And it's called 3 Gratitudes. And basically it's about just noticing every day and writing down, or talking to somebody else, or identifying with somebody else, what are 3 things that I am grateful for? And do this for 21 days in a row. And it's 3 new things each day. So it's a total of 63. And I remember when we were talking about this during one of our practice sessions. Todd said, I can't, 63, that's crazy. I can't do that. But that's the idea of the exercise. It forces you to look for what you're grateful for, to identify that. So once you identify in the first couple of days, my health, my family, my partner, my spouse, my kids, my job, once you then get further along, it forces you to identify those smaller things that you're grateful for that maybe you take for granted, such as, for me, I mentioned pizza, a good piece of pizza, or the sun shining, or going on a good run, or having a great conversation with my daughter, or getting on the ground, snuggling with my dog or my cat. It can be those little things, those quote unquote little things that are really actually big, that I want you to focus on as you get into the exercise, as you get into day 5 or 6 or 7. And you can do it with a partner or your spouse. Have them do it at the same time. And I joked that I did that with my partner, and I joked that I was hoping I'd end up on her list at some point. I did. It was maybe day 15 or 16, but hey, I'll take it. So, and it says 2 minutes. So 2 minutes means if you're doing it just by yourself, think of these 3 new things and pay attention to how it feels, each one of them. Why are you grateful for these things? And if you're doing it with someone else, then talk about it for a couple minutes. Why are you grateful for these things? And it will force you to look for the positive and look for what you're grateful for.
And Michael, we already got a number of comments from our audience on things they're grateful for, including your presentation. We've reached sort of the ending point. I see Todd has appeared to.
Yes,
with his
Todd,
hook, he's going to bring us off. He's going to hook us off the stage.
The Grim Reaper has appeared.
I'm up to 21 things now, Michael. 21.
Hey, wow. That's in two or was it, how many days has it been?
About 3.
3 days. Wow, fantastic.
Yeah. And I haven't shown up on my wife's list yet, but I'm I will.
Be hopeful one day.
Oh yeah. Oh, listen. Before we let y'all go, let me give you the important news here. Again, you're going to have to complete the survey to receive your credit, CLE credit. The links have been sent to you via the chat box throughout the course of the webinar. You can complete it anytime by visiting, the site that we give you there. The 2 codes that we've given you, again, are Alta, code number 1, and Pro, code number 2. And remember, it could take us up as much as 30 days for us to get the thing processed and get you the CLE. But if you're on a time constraint limit, let us know and we'll do what we can to try to get it to you sooner. But I do have to say that the content in this webinar has been absolutely fantastic. It's great stuff. And, honestly, and I kind of joke about it, but I am up to 21 and and these are things that we can all do to improve our well-being and our mindfulness and develop, and strive to develop a good work-life balance. So before we sign off, I do want to express, our sincere gratitude to Michael and Jay for their time and great information. Hope you guys found it useful and informative. And we especially want to extend a big thank you to all the participants. We've had a record participation today amongst all of our webinars this year. Again, hope you found it worthwhile and valuable to your time. In closing, in addition to the policies that you may have with us, just remember that the Alta Pro Risk Purchasing Group, who's putting on these webinars, our whole goal is to deliver high quality value-added services designed to help you manage risk. So with that, I do want to again say thanks to Michael and Jay and extend a safe and happy holiday season to everyone that's on this webinar and your families. Hope you have a great rest of the week and for that matter, the rest of the year as well. Thank you.